So we'll start the digestive system. The digestive system is really the system that we use to ingest food, break it down, and absorb the nutrients that we need, and get rid of the waste products, the parts that we don't need, we don't use. And there's two groups of organs in this. There is a tube that runs from your mouth right to your anus. The lumen of that tube is actually outside of your body. It is open to the outside at both ends, and so therefore the lumen is outside your body. And this is called the alimentary canal. Equally good names for it are the gastrointestinal tract or the GI tract or the gastrointestinal canal. All of those things are really synonymous. Most of the time, most people will call it GI. It, especially clinically, we tend to just refer to it as the GI tract. This is really this tube right from your mouth, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, and large intestine. The other part of the digestive system are called the accessory digestive organs. These are not part of the GI tract. They're not part of the alimentary canal. They are organs that are involved with the processing of the food in the alimentary canal, but they are not strictly part of it. So this includes things like teeth, tongue, your gallbladder, your liver, your salivary glands, your pancreas. Those are the things that aid the alimentary, what happens in the alimentary canal. So here's a diagram of it, a figure. We'll talk about the small intestine a little bit later. It has three parts, the duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. The large intestine has the cecum, the ascending colon, the transverse colon, the descending colon, the sigmoid colon, the rectum. Right? The anus and the anal canal are considered different. So what happens in the digestive system? There are 6 activities. One is ingestion, getting food into the alimentary canal. 2 is propulsion, moving it along the alimentary canal. 3 is mechanical digestion. So this is breaking the food down into manageable form. It's really not about chemically breaking it down. This is chewing and adding acids and denaturing the proteins and that kind of thing, basically liquefying the food so that it can be acted upon chemically. Chemical digestion is actually when you're breaking bonds within the food stuff itself, within the food molecules. Absorption is getting things from outside of your body to into your body. So from the lumen of the alimentary canal into your body, into your bloodstream. And defecation is about getting rid of the substances that don't get absorbed. It's the fiber. It actually is about making poo. Now you can imagine when you look at this, that this is how you should break down and think about pathologies of the digestive system. People have pathologies of ingestion, so that would be things like anorexia, bulimia, those eating disorders. Now most of the time ingestion happens at the mouth. It can actually happen up the other end. You can put food into the alimentary canal via the anus. It's not generally done, but I mean things like suppositories, that kind of thing, end up being ingested that way and broken down and absorbed. we'll talk about propulsion, but that's moving it from place to place. But there are people who have pathologies of propulsion. So these would be people with maybe neurological disorders, people with various endocrine or chemical disorders, and they have trouble moving things along. These are also people that would have blockages. So there are people that have blockages in their intestines, and it stops the propulsion. There are people that have problems where the esophagus enters the stomach and they have trouble swallowing. Mechanical digestion happens all the time. There are problems with producing enough stomach acid. There's people that don't have teeth have problems with mechanical digestion, etc. Chemical digestion is when you're lacking enzymes. So things like you can't chemically digest lactose, you're lactose intolerant. There are people that have trouble with digesting various things because they lack the enzymes to have the chemical reactions that are necessary. Problems with absorption are generally called malabsorption syndromes. Things like celiac disease is a malabsorption syndrome. Defecation, things like diarrhea or constipation are pathologies of defecation. So these things happen in various places. So ingestion normally happens in the mouth. So does mechanical digestion. Mechanical digestion happens in the stomach and in the small intestine. Absorption mostly happens in the small intestine. Some happens in the large intestine. A little bit even happens in the mouth. That's why certain medications get put under the tongue, things like nitroglycerin or homeopathic remedies, things like that. We'll talk about why that happens a little bit later. Propulsion happens right from one end to the other, from the cake hole right to the other hole. Defecation normally happens. You expel things normally through the anus. But you can really argue that vomiting is a way of getting rid of things and so things, if they don't exit the back door, exit the front door. There are people in old age homes with blockages. I shouldn't just say old age homes, but it is not uncommon for people to vomit up feces because it backs up that far. So there's two types of propulsion. One is called peristalsis, and that is really a muscular propulsion where it's like a wave and it pushes things along. This diagram nicely illustrates that. We use it for swallowing. We use it for mass movements, moving things quickly from one place to another. Most of the movement, however, in the digestive system happens through something called segmentation. And one of the ways to describe segmentation, I always make a joke about toothpaste tubes. My wife puts toothpaste on her toothbrush via segmentation. She squeezed the tube in the middle. I tend to do peristalsis. I move the toothpaste from the one end to the other. Segmentation is when it gets squeezed in the middle. Some things move towards the anus and some things will move towards the mouth. And then the next squeeze will happen in a different place, and things go back and forth in kind of a stutter step. Now, interestingly enough, with segmentation, the part of the alimentary canal that's closest to the mouth has more rapid segmentation than closer to the anus. So things end up with a net movement towards the anus. But for the most part, it goes just back and forth. And this actually moves things very slowly through the digestive system, gives times for the mechanical digestion, and it actually aids mechanical digestion. It also gives time for chemical digestion to happen, and further, it allows more time for absorption. So what regulates all of this? Well, it's obviously going to be hormonal and neural, but it needs feedback. So there has to be receptors. We've talked many times about homeostasis and the need for receptors in order to regulate something. So there's two types of receptors. There's mechanoreceptors that respond to stretch, so that you know when your stomach is full because the walls of the stomach are stretched. You know when you have to have a dump, when you need to defecate because the walls of your rectum are stretched. It's more subtle than that throughout the entire thing. Like when the duodenum has food injected in it, it stretches, and mechanoreceptors respond and feed back. But there's also changes in pH, like when acidic food from stomach acid leaves the stomach and goes into the duodenum, there are chemoreceptors that note that and get the next stage of digestion happening. There are changes in osmolarity that our chemoreceptors pick up. So those sorts of things all give feedback, and they initiate reflexes in that they are subconscious, and they activate or they inhibit digestive glands. For instance, putting food in your mouth activates the secretion of saliva. It also activates the secretion of gastric juices, because then the stomach is prepared for the food to enter. When food leaves the stomach and enters the duodenum, it actually feeds back and inhibits gastric secretions, inhibits hunger. The presence of food in the stomach activates smooth muscles to start mixing. Sometimes that's what stomach growling is. Those sorts of things are all regulated by these receptors. Some of the control is intrinsic, meaning that it's part of the digestive system. So these would be called the enteric nerve plexi. These are short reflexes where one part of the digestive system affects another part by nerves. It doesn't go to the brain. It's kind of like deep tendon reflexes in your limbs, spinal reflexes, that kind of thing. There are other things too that go right to the central nervous system. So they would be reflexes at the spinal level or all the way to the brain, and activate especially the autonomic nervous system, the parasympathetic, so the vagus nerve. So they would be more extrinsic controls. There are hormones that are released from cells in the digestive system itself, especially the stomach, that cause target organs within the digestive system to react. So for instance, there's a hormone called cholecystokinin that makes your gallbladder squeeze with the presence of fat in your stomach. So the stomach releases these hormones, and the target is still within the digestive system. So that would be an intrinsic hormonal mechanism. So it can get very complicated, but and these things all overlap, but usually we can kind of sort it out. So external stimuli makes the central nervous system, causes the intrinsic system to make things happen. Internal stimuli cause the same sort of things to happen by short reflexes. It all works together. It all interacts together. Okay, so most of the digestive system, as we see, um, exists in the abdomen, in the abdominal cavity. Now, the mouth, the esophagus, and the pharynx don't, uh, and but the stomach is past the diaphragm, and all the stomach and small intestine, large intestine, is in the peritoneal cavity. It's in the abdomen, the abdominal cavity. And like all things that are in a cavity, it is surrounded by a serous membrane, a double-walled membrane. There is a layer of serous epithelium that lines the outside of the abdominal cavity, and it's called the parietal peritoneum. And there's a layer that actually covers all the organs, and that's called the visceral peritoneum. And in between the two is a fluid-filled space called the peritoneal cavity. Um, and the peritoneal fluid is what lubricates and allows movement and stopping friction. Um, so it's no different than the pericardium or the pleura of the lungs. It's the exact same principle, and even the serous membrane is histologically the same. So this is a diagram of it. We call the bit of double-walled membrane that joins the parietal peritoneum to the visceral peritoneum, so that basically the alimentary organs hang from, we call it the mesentery, mes-entere. Entery means guts, mes means between. So most of in fact, I think all of the alimentary canal has a dorsal mesentery, and this allows the alimentary organ to move quite a bit side to side. If we don't want it to move quite as much, we can have a ventral mesentery, so it's kind of held in place like this. Now, there may be another organ in the ventral mesentery. It turns out that the liver works this way. And various other things work this way. So this arrangement is very useful because the alimentary canal will fill with food and become much larger, or be empty of food and become much smaller. It allows it to move side to side. It allows the abdomen to be used for other things, like, for instance, carrying a baby, and it can push the alimentary organs kind of aside and out of the way. So it's through the mesentery that blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, nerves can get to these organs. Now, not all the organs are loose in the cavity. Some organs have got ducts that go to them. Like from the pancreas to the duodenum, there is a duct, a pancreatic duct. From the liver and gallbladder to the duodenum, there is a duct called the hepatic duct. Now, these ducts can't afford to be attached to something that's too mobile. They'll move around too much and maybe get damaged. So we hold these organs kind of between the parietal peritoneum and the body wall. And so we call this type of arrangement retroperitoneal. Now we're going to see that kidneys are held the same way. The kidneys are found retroperitoneal. So it ends up looking like this, so that you have the serous membrane on one side of the organ and body wall on the other side. We see this where in the parts of the canal that we don't want to have very much movement. So this is very active tissue, and absorption happens here. So we need a really good blood supply. Now the blood supply to the abdominal organs is called the splanchnic circulation. It's pronounced splanchnic. Splanchnic literally just means abdominal organs. So it's the circulation to the abdominal organs. The arteries that go to the liver or the hepatic, the one that goes to the spleen is the splenic, the ones that go to the stomach or the gastrics. So there are branches off the hepatic for the right gastric, etc. But nevertheless, they're named like that. This is called the celiac trunk, hepatic, splenic, and left gastric. There is two other major arteries. One goes to the top part of the mesentery, and the other goes to the bottom. It's the superior and inferior mesenteric. And they bring blood to these organs. These organs are drained by a blood supply called the hepatic portal veins. And their portal veins means that they start in capillary beds and they end in capillary beds. They start in the capillary beds of the alimentary canal, and the blood drains from the alimentary canal, but it doesn't go back into general circulation. It doesn't go to the heart. It goes to the liver instead. And so they deliver this nutrient-rich blood from the digestive system, that's just picked up nutrients, and brings it to the liver. And at the liver, the nutrients are processed, and then the blood leaves the liver, goes back towards the vena cava, and ultimately to the right atrium of the heart. Putting things into the digestive system means that the next stop is the liver. This has some profound implications. This is the reason that some drugs have to be given intravenously, or like an injection lets you bypass the liver because it goes directly into the bloodstream. If you take a pill, it gets absorbed into the hepatic portal circulation and gets delivered to the liver before it gets delivered to the rest of the body. And it may be processed too much. So some drugs need to go directly into the bloodstream, and that's why there's different ways of delivering drugs. It also has implications for metastasis of cancer as well, like why a lot of digestive cancers end up metastasizing to liver because of the hepatic portal circulation. Okay, so the tube from your mouth to the anus is basically made up of 4 layers. If you remember, in arteries and veins, there was 3 tunics, 3 layers. This has a 4th. So it's the mucosa is closest to the lumen. The submucosa is outside of that. Then the muscularis externa is outside of that, and then the serosa, which means the serous membrane, is on the complete outside. Now, part of the canal that it's found, like the esophagus, embedded in other tissues, doesn't have a serosa. It has something called an adventitia, which is connective tissue rather than epithelial tissue. But basically, it's the same at all the levels. It looks like this. The mucosa is some sort of an epithelium here, and it's supported by connective tissue. All epithelium has connective tissue support, and so that's the layer that props up the epithelium, so it's called the lamina propria. Now, associated with the mucosa of most of the canal is a thin layer of muscle, of smooth muscle, called the muscularis mucosae. And what this is for is to kind of flick things along and flatten out and fold up the mucosa. It kind of works I don't know if you know, but you've probably seen like a fly land on a horse, and the horse can twitch its skin in the one spot to make the fly go away. It's kind of the same thing, and it prevents food from getting lodged primarily. Now, in that lamina propria layer, uh, there may be some glandular activity, and there's probably some reticular connective tissue that is used for immunity. Uh, so lymphoid tissue, as it were. So this is the layer that's called the mucosa. Now the next layer out is called the submucosa, and the submucosa tends to be kind of an areolar connective tissue. It's where a lot of glands reside. It's where the nerves and the blood vessels are mainly found. And that's the big difference, is that there's a whole layer. A big difference with the circulatory system is that we have this whole layer that is involved with nerves and blood vessels and creating some space. It's called the submucosa. Primarily connective tissue, an areolar connective tissue, a loose connective tissue. The lymphatics are found here, everything like that. So this is the layer that into which absorption happens. Absorption happens through the mucosa into the submucosa. And then nutrients are carried away from there. The next layer out is a double layer of smooth muscle. And the patterning of the smooth muscle goes one way and the other. There's a circular layer and there is a longitudinal layer. The circular layer causes constriction. The longitudinal layer causes dilation. The longitudinal layer makes the tube shorter and fatter. The circular layer makes it narrower and longer. Kind of like those things they call the Chinese finger traps. Surrounding that is the serosa, and which is a simple squamous epithelium supported by a connective tissue layer. So that's the basic arrangement. It varies. We're going to see the stomach is slightly different, but they're all variations on this theme. So the mucosa, what does it do for us? It secretes mucus. There's the digestive enzymes are found there as part of the mucosa. This is where absorption happens. This is also protection. It keeps the bad guys in the lumen. And it's made up of epithelium, lamina propria, and a muscularis layer. The epithelium varies depending on where we are in the mucosa. In your mouth, it is a stratified squamous epithelium. Through most of the intestine, it's some sort of a columnar epithelium, and with goblet cells secreting mucus. There may be secretions of enzymes. There may be a number of things here. The lamina propria is an areolar connective tissue. There are some capillaries that happen in there, but not the major blood vessels. This is where the mucosal associated lymphatic tissue is found. And then there's the muscularis. So there's the local movements, the twitchy of it. Submucosa, connective tissue. There's Peyer's patches are found here. This is where the nerves, blood vessels are found. The muscularis is responsible for propulsion. Its segmentation and peristalsis happens here. Gets modified into sphincters later. in some specific places. The serosa, like I said, is an adventitia in the esophagus. Um, any of things like the duodenum have got a serosa on one side and an adventitia on the other because it's retroperitoneal. So, again, looks like that. Now, there is a nervous system, and I'm not going to get too deep into it, that controls what goes on, and it's intrinsic. And we call this the enteric nervous system. It's a fairly new designation that, so you may not be that familiar with it. It used to be considered a subdivision of the autonomic nervous system, but it now has been given kind of its own designation, the enteric nervous system. And really, it regulates itself. And we'll just kind of leave it at that. But it is linked to the central nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. So sympathetic impulses generally inhibit what's going on in the enteric nervous system. Parasympathetic tends to stimulate it.